Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another fun episode of Light After Trauma. Kind of feels like an oxymoron, doesn't it? To be like, oh yeah, this is another fun episode for a trauma-focused podcast. But I hope that if y'all have learned anything from me by now, it's that I think that the recovery process and the trauma process just isn't really possible without some humor. And I am a really big fan of humor therapy, which is like not officially a thing, but it's my thing. Because I believe if we don't laugh about some things, we'll cry about everything. So we have with us two special guests today. And one of them is a very familiar face on the podcast. We have got Denise Wolf back with us today, which is so exciting. She has done, I believe, 2 episodes already at this point. So this is her 3rd episode on the podcast. And we just need her to keep coming back because she's amazing. So Denise has done some episodes. I think the one episode that she did with us or with just me was on art therapy. And then the other one we did talking about like law enforcement and like the whole like defunding the police, backing the blue versus backing the blue. So definitely go and check out those episodes if you have not listened already, because Denise is really an incredible person and has a lot of awesome things to say. Plus she's really funny as hell. So I'm just going to reintroduce her in case she is new and you are a new listener here on the podcast. So Denise R. Wolf she has so many letters after her last name, which just is a testament to how incredible she is. So Denise R. Wolf is the owner and practitioner therapist of Mangata Services, as well as an adjunct faculty member at Drexel and Villanova universities. Denise is a licensed professional counselor, as well as a registered, board certified, and an art therapy certified supervisor through the Art Therapy Credentials Board. For over 20 years, Denise has been practicing as a therapist, primarily treating adolescents and adults with histories of complex interpersonal trauma. She works as a consultant for many Philadelphia organizations, including the Philadelphia Art Museum, providing clinical supervision and programming related to trauma-informed care. Denise has presented at city, state, national, international conferences in the areas of trauma-informed care, trauma and neurobiology, pedagogy, clinical supervision. She has several articles published in peer-reviewed journals and has contributed chapters to seminal texts in her clinical work. And actually, as I was reading that, I think we might have even done... So actually, I think the episode where we talked about art therapy with Denise might have been, I think that one was a 2-person episode as well. We just love doing 2-person episodes with Denise. Because yes, I'm pretty sure we had somebody else on that podcast as well. So regardless, go check those episodes out because they're awesome. And then I also want to highlight our other very special guest today, who is Lynn Langan. And Lynn is brand new to the podcast, but I am really excited to have her on because we are talking all about adolescents, teenagers, whatever word you might have for them. I'm sure that some people have some choice words for teenagers, but I happen to absolutely love working with teenagers. And as you heard, Denise works with teenagers. I work with teenagers and adolescents and, kids that are like young adults. That's really my wheelhouse. And Lynn Langan is an author who just had a book come out that we are really going to dive in today because it's really all about kind of diving into the adolescent brain. So Lynn lives in Pennsylvania, and her love for writing developed after she finally learned how to read in the 4th grade after being diagnosed with a learning disability. She fell in love with the characters crafted by the wonderful Judy Blume and found a great escape into the world of fiction where everything seemed to be possible, from big problems to small. She went on to graduate from Kutztown University with a BA in professional writing, and then spent 3 glorious years teaching at an at-risk youth high school just outside of Philadelphia. And there she was inspired to write her young adult novel, which is After You Were Gone, which is available. Now, her newest book is called Duke and the Lonely Boy. And that came out in August. And that is published by Black Rose Writing. And we are here today to talk about it. And I cannot wait. Hello, Denise, Lynn, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so happy you're here. I have to admit, I feel like I'm missing the party over there. Because you're both together recording this. I'm like, I should be there. I should be over there with like a glass of wine or something.
Absolutely.
So I'm so glad you both are here. As I was telling the listeners, Denise, one of the many things that I think are just incredible about you is your versatility and your ability to just kick absolute ass in so many different realms in the mental health field. And I love it, right? We've gone in depth about art therapy. We've gone in depth about the legal system. And now here we are today, turning it to adolescence, which is like a topic we could talk about forever and something that I think all three of us are very passionate about. So thanks for coming back again.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Of course. It's such a pleasure. And Lynn, it is such a pleasure to meet you. So talk to me about your journey to becoming a writer, because if I understand correctly, this isn't your first book, right? You've had a book out before?
That is correct. Not published though. It's been for sale, but this is the first book that was sold for me. So I've been doing this. I went to college for writing. And then, when you get out of college, that's not really how you're going to make money, apparently. So, and I was doing newspapers and short story stuff. So probably when I was around 27, I was like, you know what? I really want to write a book. I want to do this. And so I spent a lot of time digging in and learning how to do this, actually, because college can only teach you so much. But when you get out into the real world, you have to continue practicing and learning and growing in your field of whatever you're doing. So Scbwi Conferences, which is just a whole chapter of adolescent writers, from probably picture books all the way up to 18 years old. So it's a whole bunch of authors like me getting together and going to these conferences and learning and figuring out how to write an entire book and query it and all the steps that go along with it. So it's been an incredibly long and hard journey, but worth it. Definitely worth it.
Yeah. And I think that's very important that you said that, because the life of a writer is not an easy one.
No, it's not. And
I think it's really important to shed light on that, because I think a lot of people have an idea of what it looks like. I want to be a writer, but then putting that into practice, in theory, it seems like a life of luxury, right? I write whenever I want. I sip my coffee, pinky up as I type on the computer while the birds are chirping outside. And it's no.
And the words are so easy. They're right there and I'm just plucking them out of the air. And that's, that is absolutely not the case. And there's a lot of, it's a lot of discipline, because you work a full-time job. And then there's no one's yelling at you to go to the computer to write this book. The future is unknown if it ever sees the light of day. But that's kind of where I grew my piece from, was that I'm doing this thing because this art is what makes me. And it's my joy and my happiness, even though there's struggle along the way. If I wasn't doing it, then I don't think I'd be complete. So, but it is a lot of discipline. It's a lot of just sitting down and looking at the blank computer screen back at me, come on, put some words down. It's
any second now.
Any second now. This big idea is going to come to me. And that's, that's not true.
It's so tough. It's so tough. This is my next question. And this is a question that I have for both of you. Tell me why the love for adolescence, because all three of us share a big passion for the kiddos in this world. Yeah. Why? And it doesn't matter, whoever can go first, but I'm very curious as to why adolescents are such a passion. At least in my experience, I always knew that I wanted to work with kids, and everybody would tell me, even my professors in college would be like, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. And then grad school, what do you want to do? I want to work with kids. No, you don't.
Yeah.
So everybody kept trying to talk me out of working with kids. It's very unpopular. So tell me, like, for each of you, why is it so important to you?
Well, so Alyssa, I'll start. Part of it too, Alyssa, like I was told the same thing, like, you don't want to do that. And so tell me I don't want something or I can't do something, and I'm going to do it 1,000 times over and light everything on fire in my path. So like,
yes,
that's part of
yes.
it. That's also a connection to adolescence and that like inner 15-year-old kid that like is still like, lives in my heart that says like, like, fuck you, I can do this. Like, get out of my way. So that's part of it, right? I'm like oppositional, and that connects with adolescence. Part of it is that I had a troubled adolescence, you could say. I'll stop there. And so I feel some of it, I feel like is not quite payback. I don't have the right word, but like making repairs for some of the errors that I made along the way. And part of it is like because I can. Right? Because I can, and because a lot of people can't or don't want to. And I guess there's a fourth part that like adolescents are so exciting from a neurodevelopmental perspective.
Right.
It is like the 4th of July in their brains. And it is such a great time of change and shifting and possibility.
And discovery.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And so for all of those reasons.
Yeah. And I would go into that also for all those things and say that like I want to be an advocate, because I remember in my youth not being taken seriously because we're young and our voices don't matter, and that's not true. We are young, and we are not now, but we were young and they are young, and they see things and make connections in ways that if you stop and listen to them, like it makes sense. And we're missing some of that youthful view in the way we see the world. As we get older, I think we get more narrow in our views, and also take less chances, where when you're young, you kind of live and learn by your mistakes. And I want them to know that that's okay. That's exactly how you're supposed to learn. And the adults that are walking around judging you or saying like what you're doing is wrong or whatever, it's not. It's your time to grow into a person. And so I want to be there to foster that. I want to authentically, I want to make sure that's in my work, that they have opinions that matter and the way they see the world matters, and they have a place for that. Yeah,
absolutely. Have either of you seen the Twilight Saga, the movies?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess let's take it to the fourth one, right? Breaking Dawn, part 2.
Yeah. Part 2.
I know. I'm going here, right?
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I just finished watching that series again last week. So it's fresh on my mind, but this is kind of how I see adolescents. And this is what I love so much about them. So remember the part in Breaking Dawn part 2, where Bella becomes a vampire and everything in the world is like new to her, and her senses are heightened, and she can smell things and run at a pace she's never been able to run before. And her skin she's in a different body, and she has a thirst for things she never thirsted before. And she just feels like all of these things, like sensory overload.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what it can be like working with like adolescents. Like the world is just new to them. They're in bodies that they're not super familiar with. Things are like explosive and exciting. And
yes,
I love it. I feel like that's what it's like to work with like kids sometimes. Like that's what it's like to be an adolescent sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. You got these thoughts and everything's brand new, everything. And your world is so small. You don't realize how big the world is until you become an adult and you start living in it. But the adolescent brain is like, the picture that they see is very tiny. And then it makes the things that they're experiencing seem so heavy. And so like, that's another thing to work with the adolescents is cool. Cause you could be the person that says, calm down, or you don't know what you're talking about. Or you could be the person that says, sit down, let me talk to you. Let's talk about this. Let's have a real conversation about it. Like, this isn't the end of the world. This is just a beginning.
Yep.
So
And it feels gigantic and soul crushing because it is for you, because your life is only, yay long. And this is taking up such a big part of it.
Right. Yeah.
Which is cool and exciting, and like to be there to validate it and celebrate it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. To validate it and to celebrate it, especially because so many kids get shut down.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. Like the amount of times, like I was saying, like before we started recording, the amount of times that adults say to children, like, you don't know how easy you have it, or what do you know? You're just a kid. And I'm like, I actually think they know a lot more than we know as adults.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Smart as hell.
They're smart. Yes. And they just need a platform for themselves to be able to, and that's what's so critical too, because at that age, if you have that one adult that's shutting you down and you're influenced by that, your whole trajectory of your life can be changed just by some adult making some offhanded comment to you, and I see that a lot. I think we see that a lot too. Like probably all three of us, because everybody works with kids or has worked with the kids, that like you have one person that doesn't validate you, and then you get in your head and you can't put it down, So yeah, absolutely.
Or one of us, I'm sure we've been those kids. I know I for sure was that kid who really felt like, I felt like as a kid, I was always too much. My emotions were always too big for somebody. It was always like, calm down. Stop crying. Why are you crying about this? You have to get over it. You have to move on with your life. I see kids like in my office who come in with those same big emotions and those same big feelings. And I think about how they suffer so much less simply because another adult is able to say, oh man, of course you feel that way.
Right.
It makes all the difference, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. I see you. Yeah. That's what you're saying. I see you. You exist. Everything you feel exists. It's real. It's here. Yeah. Don't bury that down because it's making other people feel uncomfortable about it. Right. And I think a lot of kids get their voice shut off because of that. No one's validating them, or they can crawl inside their head and just be quiet. Right. And 1,000%. 1,000%. Yeah. And it's sad. You don't want that. I don't want to see that for anybody. And I think like, it's good to think of it in terms like that. It could just be like a breakup with your first boyfriend or girlfriend. And like, as an adult, you're like, get over it. You're going to get hurt 1,000 times. Well, guess what? This is the first time I'm being hurt. And everything you're saying to me is how I'm going to model my life from this point on. This is how I'm going to deal with things that come up in my life because you told me to calm down or didn't see me or didn't hear me. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think that's good to give kids voices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it makes them feel human. Like I almost feel like we dehumanize kids, right? And we don't see them as having the same kind of complex feelings and emotions that adults have. And there's always like the, well, I'm the adult, like I'm the adult and you're the kid and this doesn't concern you. And it's like, oh, if we could shift that, right? Your kid is an independent human with independent thoughts and feelings and viewpoints of the world. And if we could shift from you're just a kid, what the fuck do you know, to, hey, tell me how you view that. Like, I wonder how much it would make such a big difference in the lives of adolescents, I think.
Absolutely. And when people say, oh, you don't know how good you have it. And like, I look at kids and I'm like, man, you don't know how bad you have it because you have to be plugged in to this social media, to this, you're always plugged in and you don't get a break from that ever. And so like, I look at like my nieces and nephews and I'm just like, God, what would it be like if you could just put that phone down? I know you can't because you feel like you have to be involved in that, but like, it's just crazy. You don't ever have a safe spot. Like when we were kids, like you can get away from school or all of that and just, go geek out in your room and do whatever you want. But like not these kids, they're just sitting there taking selfies 24/7 and feeling like they have to, and people are judging them for that. And they're not looking at like, what are the consequences of that? What does that really feel like to be plugged in 24/7 and never getting a break.
And they don't know because they haven't had a different experience.
Right. So it's very disheartening when adults, I think, judge the kids like, oh, you don't know what it's like. And I walked up to school on a hill and back again on a hill. And like, no, These kids they're going through it. There's a lot of pressures on them. New things that they're coming against. Like, there's just so much for them, I feel.
Yeah. So like, I think part of the reason why collectively adults like dismiss and minimize adolescence is because they don't want to remember their own experiences, because the growing pains, right? Like growing pains, like they're emotional and physical. And so, they shut them down, be quiet, get over it, calm down. Like being on an airplane when there's a crying baby and somebody's like, shut that baby up, and my response is, oh, you were born a full grown adult asshole. Like you were never a baby. And like people forget, they want to forget or deny their adolescence.
Right. Absolutely.
But we don't. And that's why we're amazing.
Right.
No, that's why we're fucking amazing at what we do, because we understand the magic that lives in adolescence. And I love it. I love it. So tell me, Lynn, where was the inspiration for this book? Because I think, go ahead. I'll let you answer that question before I drill you with 5 more questions.
Yeah. Well, the idea of how we indirectly impact people versus directly impact people has always been fascinating to me, because Denise and I worked at Carson Valley Children's Aid, which is a residential facility for troubled youth. And we had a lot of Philadelphian children who came out to our school that were bused in.
Is that how the two of you met?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So this one day, guidance counselor came out and said, okay, I want you to give out a soft pretzel to a student that you think's deserving. Okay. And like, we're teachers, we're like a million miles. We're not, you just take the ticket and you're like, okay, like whatever. So I gave it to this student who was very short, very quiet, like very closed off. She didn't like to talk at all. And I walked up to her and I said, here you go. And she started crying. And I was like, why, what's going on? She's like, I didn't think you knew who I was. I'm like, I'm your teacher for like a long time. Of course. Like, I know who you are. She's like, I just didn't think you saw me. And so like, from that point on, I was like, wow, the littlest things that we do really do make a difference sometimes. And you don't know what that thing is going to be. And then that kind of just fascinated me. Like, how many other things have I've done to people that change their perspective, or vice versa? And it just kind of like, that whole seed was planted in me that I wanted to write this book where like, you think you know, but you don't know. You don't know what's going on in that person's life. And what does that really look like? And how would that really spawn out into like a novel? How could I get that across? So that's kind of where I started playing with Duke and the Lonely Boy, because they both have these ideas about each other, but they don't really know each other at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like, and again, I'm still reading this, but from all that I've gathered from the book so far, it seems like that is the moral of one of the many morals of the story, is that you truly just don't know. Because what you did is you magically crafted 2 characters who couldn't be further apart from one another. Yeah. So without giving like too much away, can you say a little bit more about who like Duke and the Lonely Boy are? Because I just love their story right from the get-go.
Yeah. So Duke is it seems stereotypical, but it's not, I promise. Duke is the popular boy, and he's the all-star football player, and he's got a very bright future ahead of him, but he's struggling in math. So something very simple. The coach gets him this tutor, Tommy, who is just this outcast, but not in the stereotypical form. He's just quiet, and nobody really knows his existence in the school or his story. So they meet up, and that's how the story begins. But it's told, obviously, through 2 perspectives. So the first half of the book, you're really getting Tommy's his perspective as a little person, and his story of what's going on. And you're seeing him through Duke's eyes as as a teenager. So I think it's unpacking that for Tommy. And Duke's got his own struggles going on, which, Tommy kind of looks at like, what's up? You can't do math, but you got everything else going for you.
The story too jumps around in time, which kind of reminds me of therapy work, right? Where it's not like you sit down with the client in the first time and download their entire history, right? Like you're working through their story kind of like event by event, and it's not sequential. And, so we as therapists have to be mindful that we don't make assumptions from go, because I think for me, one of the big takeaways is when you know, and to remember that you don't. And so Duke and Tommy have these really complex stories and have this sort of initial encounter where they think they know each other. Yeah. And then throughout this jumping in time, back and forth in time, and these crossovers of their interactions and their own personal stories, your perspective and understanding and empathy really shifts.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what else I love is that you're breaking this stereotype. So if a high schooler were to pick up this book and read it, whether that high schooler is the football star in the school, the popular one, or more of the loner, you can still learn something. I love that this breaks the stereotype, because I think a lot of people feel like the kids who are loners are the only kids who have stuff going on. Right. They've got issues, right? I can't tell you how many times I have heard other kids be like, oh yeah, there's the loner. That's the kid that's gonna, shoot up the school.
Right.
And say dumb shit like that kids say. But you also don't know how much is going on behind the football stars, the basketball stars, the most popular girl. So I like that you break that stereotype as well.
I wanted the reader to be able to identify with real characters, right? There's heavy issues in there, but I'm not sugarcoating that for you as the writer. I'm going to give it to you because I feel like the reader deserves that.
That it's there are heavy issues in there.
Yeah, that there's heavy.
Some of it's tough.
Yeah, some of it's tough and it's real. And, maybe you can see yourself in some of these things. And I like that Duke is the popular one, but he's growing so much in this story about trying to find his place. Just because you're popular doesn't mean you know your place. Doesn't. Duke constantly questions whether is this real, or if I don't keep doing things that these people are saying that I do, then I'll lose everything. And I do think that that's a struggle for the popular kids. And so if you could pick up that book as a popular kid and be like, yeah, right, I have things too. And I don't know what to do with these things. They're heavy, and maybe I don't want to be in the box that I've suddenly found myself in. Mm-hmm. Maybe I want to go sit with the loner or the art students or the music group or whoever, there's high school is very segregated in where you're going to be. So it's nice for the popular kid to be able to pick up that book and say, yeah, I do have things and I don't necessarily know what the hell I'm doing. I don't have it all. I just appear to have it all. And sometimes that appearance really plays with your head.
And in a lot of ways, Tommy has more resilience than Duke, right? Mm-hmm. Because Tommy's endured a lot. And, in some ways that's given him a lot of strength.
Yeah, but he doesn't know he has it.
Right.
Yeah, that's his journey, is that he is authentic to himself, but he doesn't know how to get that out to the world because he's just been shut down by his life situations.
I'm thinking about the Breakfast Club. I'm like, is this a modern day Breakfast Club? In the end, when I think John Nelson's narrating, and he's like, in each one of us, there's a cheerleader and the weird, the art one and the football player.
Right.
Right. And you'll meet other characters in the book. You'll meet Charlie and Roxy. And I'm thinking there's a little bit, it's not like, oh, the popular kid's going to read this and identify with Duke. These characters are so well-developed and complex. They really speak, I think, collectively of the adolescent experience.
Yeah. And sometimes I find I read young adult books and they bring up something that's heavy and then they leave it. They just leave it there.
Skirt it away.
And it's like, no, that's not what the real emotion of that is. Like if it's, don't just put it in there because it's heavy or like poppy, or like, don't brush over that. Like we're also, as authors, I think we have a moral code that we should say, we're not going to glaze over these emotions because it's not going to sell books or it's not Hollywood enough. Like, no, we have a duty. Like, I think that's what it is. Like, we have a duty as these authors that are writing to these young children to really be their ushers into the world and validate their feelings that they're feeling and not gloss over I was reading a book recently and the main character was raped. And then we were done. And it's like, no,
that's not how that goes.
No, that's absolutely not how that goes.
Like that.
Right. So now, like, my fear is that like a young girl is reading that and is like, well, I guess I gloss over that. This thing that happened to me, I guess I don't talk about it or I don't have real feelings about it. Well, no, that's an injustice.
Yeah. And as you're both saying this, my adolescence is very much like on the forefront of my brain, just because of all of the like inner child, like the inner child work that I've been doing recently. So I have lots of memories from my adolescence. And I read, I was in school, and the time that I was like in middle school, we didn't talk about this stuff, right? This really wasn't something that got talked about, not even in the slightest. And even today, when it is getting talked about, it's usually not getting talked about correctly or not handled well. So we've got a long way to go, but that's a whole nother podcast. But I turned to books. I was such a reader, and I turned to all of these young adult novels. And I remember, so as you were saying that, Lynn, I'm sitting here and the feeling that I used to feel as a 14-year-old is coming back to me, where I was opening these books, these young adult novels, trying to find the darkest ones I could find. I need the darkest book that is in this section that somebody will let me take from this godforsaken school library. And I would read it and look, and they would touch on something dark. And that, to me, would be what I needed to get into. I would be like, okay, we're talking about drugs here. We're talking about sexual abuse here. And my like 14-year-old brain is like, I need more of this. Well, what do you mean you were raped? What are we ever going to talk about this? No, We're just going to talk about how you got into a fight with your best friend now. And that's like the prime. That's the plot, right? The rape is. So I love that you're doing that, because I agree. And I think that is such a missing piece for so many young adult novels, is that for Hollywood purposes, for selling purposes, for stigma purposes, because we don't like to talk about these things, a lot of authors gloss over it.
Right.
There's not many people who dig right in to the core and look at all facets of it, because it's uncomfortable for people.
Yeah, definitely. And there's going to be times where the reader is going to be uncomfortable in Duke and the Lonely Boy, and that's appropriate. My only hope is that, I did a good enough job that if it touches one kid's life, if it's a map for one kid's life, then I've done my job. So that's kind of what my philosophy is on that. I want to be authentic and give you a real picture of what's going on.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's ugly,
Sometimes it's ugly, but that's what's so helpful. And I know I shared this when we were going back and forth in emails, but for me, that's the book that I was finally able to get my hands on that went into detail. This book, it was called Almost Lost. It was the journey of a teenager's healing process and recovery from addiction. And it's like the transcript of his therapy sessions were in the book. And I read that book and I felt like I was home.
Yeah.
Right.
And not only did I feel like that therapist in that book was speaking to me as a 14-year-old, I was in the 8th grade when I read this book and did a book report on it. But in that moment, that book told me, this is what I need to do with the rest of my life. So when you say, like, if this book can help one person, I guarantee it's going to help so many more than that, because I see what a book did for me.
Right.
It can change lives.
Absolutely.
So there's a theory I have to bring up here, right? So
Please do. Please do.
A theory about why looking at art, why we have these sort of like, oh my gosh, relief moments. Like if you're, say, at the art museum or listening to a piece of well-composed music or whatever it is. So Kreitler and Kreitler have this theory belonging to psychology of the arts that we take in a well-crafted, piece of art like Lynn's book, that we take our diffuse tensions and anxieties from our lives, the day, whatever it is, project it into the work of art or read the book, and through resolution of the formal elements, right? Story arc, plot, characters, all that kind of stuff, we then experience a sense of our own like relief or release of tension, cortisol, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really connecting that to like Lynn's story and your story and, my story of like the dark books that like I dug out from like, where the banned books from the library. And
Yes.
like, even if it wasn't directly my story, to be able to like be part of somebody else's that reflected a part of me that's well crafted, right? We get a sense of relief and release.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I have never heard of that before. And that is fascinating. And as you're sitting here, I'm such a dork. As you're sitting here saying that, I'm going, oh shit, that's why I love Harry Potter so much. That's why I can't stop reading Harry Potter.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a part of us that we project into these, works of art. Right. And then through the character's resolution, we experience a sense of our own. Does that mean it's going to fix your problems? No, that's not at all what I'm saying.
No. But sometimes, I think we're all saying it too, it's nice to not feel alone. Right? We're not alone in that.
Yeah.
Even if it's not our story, if it's just something that's sort of similar or where we can insert ourselves, like even if it's just a false victory because you read the character's victory, it does give you hope.
Yes.
And hope is all you really need at the end of the day, because if you feel that you have that, some kind of a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnels per se, then you're going to truck through to the end and find it for yourself, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you are dealing with the biology of an adolescent brain and their emotional response center is on fire and their prefrontal cortex, the place for rational thought is underdeveloped.
Yeah.
Hope can be a hard thing to come by.
Very.
Yeah, it's abstract, right? So like I think about adolescents as like the top third of their brain is like under construction, right? Yes. It's not even there. And so hope is an abstract concept that belongs in that top third. So you can't like talk about it, you have to feel about it. Right. And that's where like, art comes in to create that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there would be times where there was several scenes in this book that I wrote, and then I would, walk away from my desk and come back and be like, nope, you wrote that as an adult. Stop. Why you can't fix the problems like that, stop it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this might be a little bit of a, I guess, abstract question, but was there anything that you had to do to be able to like really channel your inner adolescent, or is that something that's very easily accessible to you?
It's something that I think is very easily accessible to me for some reason. It's a gift, I think.
It's a gift.
that I was cursed. It's both those things. So I was reading this book about, I'm dyslexic. So there's this book about a dyslexic author wrote this book about the gifts of being dyslexic. And one of the things is that the way we form memories around the events that are happening, because like for a normal brain, it goes, syntax, what's that word? Here we go. Syntax it fires.
Synapses.
It goes, but for a dyslexic brain, it kind of takes a U-turn. Like it pings differently. And because of that, we're like really grounded in memory. Like we have an excellent memory for all things, but that's kind of like our survival guide, because it's how we thrive. So because of that, I can basically tell you everything that's happened in my life my memory for some reason, well, not for some reason, for that reason is extremely strong. So when I sit down to write these adolescents, I can just sit down and be like, okay, you're 17, go. Maybe I'll think of a couple things of like high school, of events, and just remember how small my brain was or what I was thinking or feeling at that point. And then I can dive in. And then that's how I know when I'm not being authentic to the characters or the voice, is when I feel like my adult brain is coming in and being like, well, that was easy. And I'm like, wait, no, it shouldn't be easy. It's not an easy job. You can't think like that. So I feel like because of all of that, that's why I have I'm very good with my memories and all of that.
That makes sense.
Very in touch with that.
Another, fun fact about Lynn, this was, oh my gosh, I think this is so cool. Like, Lynn has like soundtracks or songs for the characters. So like trying to get into character. Yeah. Lynn will like, I need to listen to like.
Oh, that's so cool.
Right. Yeah. So it's like that initial, here's the story that I'm thinking in my head. Here's the soundtrack that I'm going to put to that, the music. And then it's very helpful in rewrites because like, my agent's coming back and saying, go into this novel and fix this problem. I'm like, what? That was so long ago. Oh, I know. I'll just hit this play button right here. And then boom, I'm right back into the world. Like I'm right there. Yeah.
Wow. That is brilliant. Where did you even think to be able to do that? Like, because music, depending on whatever you put on, can get you anywhere you want to go.
Anywhere you want to go.
Music will take you there.
Well, it was, the writing process is unique in the fact that you sit down to the computer and you're asking yourself to leave yourself. You're asking yourself to forget about whatever troubles you had that day or your perspective of the world, or sometimes your gender, and go. And so as a writer, that's the thing that you have to work on the most, is like, who is actually at the keyboard today? Is it Lynn? Or is it Duke? Or is it Tommy? Who is it? So in order for me to train my mind to do that, back when I first wrote my first novel, I would play their songs. I would play them like 3 or 4 times before I even put my hands to the keyboard, because I knew I had to listen to it repeatedly to get all of my personal baggage out of the way so that the character could step forward and I wouldn't be influenced in my writing. So it's almost like I can do it now without music. It's really just training your it's almost like a meditative state is what I would best explain it to, where you consciously ask yourself to exit. Yeah.
It's fascinating and brilliant. Brilliant.
And something else Lynn taught me about writing, because I've done some like academic writing, is to write first with like an old timey pen on paper. Right. And there's something about that kinesthetic sensory, just kind of like writing actual words on paper. And then the first edit, becomes entering it into the keyboard. Right. And that connects so much more with sort of the, I think, emotional, part of ourselves.
Absolutely. I usually edit my first round. I'll print out the manuscript and edit that way, because, there's something about that process that gets you out of the computer.
Agreed.
It's more authentic to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed. There's something so different that comes out of you when you are physically writing than hitting buttons on a keyboard. It's a completely different experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm always like, I talk about like journaling with like, some of my kids who I feel like it might be helpful for. And they're like, well, can I just like type it out on my phone? And I'm like, hell no.
No. Yeah, get that pen in your hand. Feel it. There's a feeling.
Get a fun pen, right?
Yes.
I have a set of like I think it's like 100 pack. Oh God. 100 pack of like glitter gel pens. Yeah. Like I'm still a giant child.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are they scented?
Denise, I looked for the scented ones. Lord knows I tried. Unfortunately, they're not. But I wish. So the last question I want to ask you, because I also think this is important, because I do know that we have, listeners out there who are parents, and if they don't have an adolescent currently, they have an up and coming adolescent or adolescents at home. Do you feel that this book is one that can also help parents and even any adults who work with kids get a better view inside the mind of a kid, which will then also better help them to relate to their kid in real life. Does that make sense?
Yes. And yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because I think, one of the things that you try to do as young adult writer is that remembering the place of everybody in their lives, right? So yes, you're living in a family, and yes, you have chores and you have bedtimes and you have all those things, and that's all true. But what's really important is the social aspect, right? That's where you're getting all your connections, and that's like the most important part. And so as a parent, I think it's easy to look at your 17 or 16-year-old kid and forget that there's this whole other life that is very complicated. And you're just thinking, God, they're upstairs in their room. What are they, they're taking out the trash. It's easy to get into the routine of life and forget that there's these little stories that these children or kids are having that have nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. You can only hope that you're a great parent and you modeled well, right? Because they're out there in the real world by themselves. And this is the time. I think that's why I like this time, this age, because it is the loosening of the parents and the influence and the family structure, which is also very hard on the parents. But it's just as hard on the kids. And they, it's that constant, like, I think you see that a lot with Duke, where he feels guilty for not watching football with his dad because that's what they used to do. But like, he has a social life now and he needs to go out with his friends, but he still has that little like internal battle. Like, I'm going, but there's also a sadness that I know that this is slipping away, even though I'm looking forward to my independence, it is also scary.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think for both parents and kids, that's a good reminder of that.
Right. That it's all the feels, right? It's all the feel. Like, I had to do an art engagement with youth. And so I had to craft like a 50-word message about adolescence to adolescence. So it's not a lot of words. Lynn helped me write it. Thank you. And it started off with, no matter what, it's going to hurt. And so it was really great, if I do say so. And I submitted it and they changed it before publication and didn't check with me. So when I read my like message to adolescents in this glossy thing they put out, it was like, being a teen is great. I'm like, fuck no.
What the fuck?
I said it's going to hurt, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
You wrote, it's going to hurt. And they took that and said, being a teen is great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jesus, Lord Almighty.
So to your question earlier, Alyssa, I think it's really valuable and important for adults, educators, right, to like remind ourselves of like all of that angsty stuff, all the feels, like get back into that. Like, no matter what, it's going to hurt. You're going to be okay, but you can't escape the pain. That's where growth happens.
Right. Exactly. Just go ahead and feel what you need to feel. And, it would be funny if you interviewed, I would say, Duke's family, they also, I think, would come away and have the perspective that everything in Duke's life is okay, where it's not. And his family member that really knows that is his sister, which is also good for parents to, I think, see from that angle that like siblings have that connection with each other, and they'll, they have that, they can look out for each other, or they can call each other out on their bullshit or any of that. But it's just a weird time in the life where everybody's learning how to let go of this family unit.
I think, the most important part is just what both of you were speaking to, is being able as adults to get back in touch with not just the angst, but all the feelings. I think so much of adulthood has become just about numbing out, right? We're working 9 to 5, playing music or a podcast or a news radio in the car to and from work. You come home, you eat, you do whatever, you go to bed, and you do it all the next day. And weekends are, stereotypically include going out, drinking, this, that. It's so focused around just numbing out. Like, as adults, we almost just like don't even have time for our feelings. And I think that's what makes the three of us so fucking incredible, because I don't sense that we do that. Like, we feel things and refuse to live in the numbed out state that I think a lot of adults have found themselves in.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think one of the best advice that Denise has ever given me in my life was that she said, when I was going through some tough times, she was like, look, pull up a chair, make yourself a cup of tea, get to know that feeling that you're feeling, ask your questions, like just don't shy away from it, lean into it. And it's really good advice to remember that as an adult, like you're right, we get into these routines and again, we get more and more narrow in our thinking and the way. And I think that's part of like society's pressure too. Like, don't talk about your feelings, just do. And it's okay to have feelings around. If you want to feel sad, it's okay to feel sad. Things aren't working out. It's okay if things aren't working out. It's not the end of the world. Things, that's what's so fun about adolescents too, is that they can fall down and get back up. You're so resilient when you're young. Because you just haven't really quite learned that, to stay on the floor. I think like that's probably what the three of us have learned. Like we keep standing up. We're gonna we're gonna take the punches in the ring, and it's gonna hurt, but we keep going, and we're gonna challenge. We're gonna feel those feelings. Mm-hmm. We're gonna figure out how not to get hit like that again.
Mm-hmm. But we probably will.
But we probably will. And we'll still move forward, though. Yeah, we won't shy away from it.
Yeah, and we'll have great stories to tell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's living. To me, that's living at its fullest.
Right. Absolutely.
Yep.
I love it.
Mistakes. Yeah.
So if people would like to buy this book, where on earth can they find it? So I know Amazon is one, but I also want to plug if it's in any kind of small businesses or anything like that, or is it mostly Amazon?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and the great and wonderful bookshop where you can go on and order it, and it fosters independent bookstores. So if you buy it from bookshop, it will be pulled from your local store.
Mm-hmm. Bookshop.org.
Yeah.
Bookshop.org. Okay. I will make sure. So yeah, to the listeners out there, this is a book you are absolutely going to want to get your hands on, whether you're an adolescent tuning in, whether you're in the young adult phase of your life, whether you have kids of your own, whether you are a teacher or a therapist. Truthfully, even if you're a therapist who works with adults, so many of the adults that you're working with have unresolved childhood issues. I don't like the word issues, but I can't think of a better word right now. So, it's very important to be able to tap into this type of stuff. So honestly, this book is very useful for everybody. And of course, feel free to use Amazon because it'll get to you, very quickly. But also I am going to put the other link in there because, support your local bookstore or, support small businesses as well. So head over to the show notes. And Denise and Lynn, thank you for a wonderful episode. I love talking about kids.
Yes.
So it's been fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. For more information, please head over to lightaftertrauma.com, or you can also follow us on social media. On Instagram, we are at lightaftertrauma, and on Twitter, it is at lightafterpod. Lastly, please head over to patreon.com/lightaftertrauma to support our show. We are asking for $5 a month, which is the equivalent to a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So please head on over again. That's patreon.com/lightaftertrauma. Thank you, and we appreciate your support.